London's most famous 19th century haunting took place in a house in fashionable Mayfair at 50 Berkeley Square. For a time, people used to come and stare at the building and speculate about the ghost, a ghost so horrible that the owner of the house left it deserted for many years. Few who saw the ghost lived to tell the tale. Lord Littleton was one of the few who did. He belonged to a family who were called the most haunted family in England. He collected ghosts, and he spent a night in the second-floor room at 50 Berkeley Square, the room where the ghost always appeared. He took with him 2 blunderbuss guns loaded with buckshot and 6-penny pieces. The silver coins were meant as charms to protect him from the evil spectre. During the night, Lord Littleton met the ghost. It came into the room and leapt through the air at him. In the nick of time, he managed to raise the gun and fire. The ghost fell like a shot duck to the floor, then seemed to evaporate. Lord Littleton could describe no more about the thing he had seen, nothing about its looks and shape. It was merely a shadowy presence. But of this he was sure. He had never met a more terrible, more malign ghost in his life. So famous was the horror in its day that a now equally famous ghost story was based on it by a writer called Edward Bulwer Lytton, who specialised in tales of the supernatural. But his hero suffers far worse at the hands of the spectre than Lord Littleton or anyone else suffered in the room in Berkeley Square. There are many accounts of the hauntings of this ghoulish ghost. The 2 best known concern Sir Robert Warboys and a couple of sailors. Sir Robert was a handsome young man with an ancestral home at Bracknell in Berkshire. He did not believe in ghosts nor any supernatural spirits. When he heard of the terrible things people had endured at number 50, he dismissed them as impossible. He said as much to some friends one night. They argued and finally challenged Sir Robert to spend a night alone in the haunted room. Sir Robert took up the challenge. The owner of the house, Mr. Benson, was contacted and asked permission for Sir Robert to sleep in the second-floor bedroom. Mr. Benson wanted nothing to do with the escapade. He knew, he said, what had been the fate of others who had dared sleep there. But Sir Robert and his friends were determined. It was now a matter of honour. Sir Robert had been challenged, and he had accepted. If Mr. Benson would agree, then they would all come to the house on the appointed night, and be on hand to aid Sir Robert should he come to harm. Furthermore, Sir Robert would be armed with a gun. Surely these precautions would be safeguard enough against the worst of attackers, human or ghostly. Reluctantly, Mr. Benson agreed. A night was fixed for the visit. Sir Robert and his friends went off, excited by the prospect of taking part in such an unusual event. The appointed evening came. The party met at Mr. Benson's house and ate dinner together. They laughed and talked with forced good humour. Everyone was nervous, though they pretended not to be. Everyone, that is, except Mr. Benson. He was nervous and did not try to hide it. Rather, he tried to persuade Sir Robert to give up this madcap idea. Sir Robert refused. His honour was at stake. Besides, he did not believe anything would or even could happen. Rational argument was useless. So Mr. Benson went once more through the safeguards. Sir Robert was to have a gun loaded and ready by his side in the room. His friends were to sit up throughout the night in case help was needed. Added to this, Mr. Benson had arranged for a bell to be installed in the sitting room where Sir Robert's friends were to wait. It was attached to a bell pull in the haunted room. Should Sir Robert need help, he was to ring on the bell to warn his companions. Sir Robert agreed to do this, but, he went on, he was feeling more nervous than he had expected. Therefore, he wanted everyone to wait until he rang the bell twice before coming to him. Dinner over, the plans understood by everyone present, Sir Robert was shown to the room. It was large and comfortably furnished with a double bed and armchairs. 2 big windows looked out over the square. A fire was burning brightly in the hearth. Sir Robert took off his jacket. As he did not expect to sleep that night, he propped himself up on the bed. At one side he had the pistol cocked and ready. On the other side hung the bell pull. In the room below, Mr. Benson and Sir Robert's friends settled themselves for their night's vigil. 1 flight of stairs separated the 2 rooms. Sir Robert had gone upstairs at 11:15. Nothing happened until the 12 o'clock chimes rang through the city. As the last strokes of midnight sounded, The little bell on the sitting-room wall jangled. Mr. Benson sprang from his chair and ran to the door. "Wait!" cried one of the others. "He said he would ring twice if he needed us." The words were hardly out of his mouth before the bell jangled violently, almost tearing itself free from the wall. Benson rushed from the room, closely followed by the others. Halfway up the stairs he heard a shot fired in the haunted room. Seconds later he threw open the door. Sir Robert lay with his legs sprawled across the bed, his head hanging over the edge, almost touching the floor. In his left hand he grasped the bell pull, which had been torn from its fixing. On the floor near his right hand lay the pistol. Benson and the others hurried across the room. It was then they saw Sir Robert's face. His eyes stared from their sockets in an agony of terror and fear. His lips were curled back over his teeth, which were clenched tightly as though locked in a fit. "My God," said one of the men, "cover him up." Benson lifted this fear-stiffened body onto the bed and draped it with a sheet. Sir Robert had died, not from a bullet, but from such extreme terror as no man can live through. What was it that could cause such deadly fear? No one knows. The spectre has been described as a man-ghost with an unbelievably ghastly face, a face white and flabby, with a huge gaping mouth black as pitch. Others have said it was an animal creature with many legs and tentacles, a monstrous thing that crawled from London's sewers. Yet others say it was a shapeless being composed of depthless shadows. On one thing only everyone agrees. It was an evil being that wished the death of any victim foolish enough or unfortunate enough to stray into its domain, that comfortably furnished Mayfair room where Sir Robert gambled his life for his honour and lost. Edward Blunden and Robert Martin were two sailors who met the evil ghost by chance. They were on their way from Portsmouth to their homes. They arrived in London late on a December night, with little money left in their pockets. For a time they wandered the streets, arguing about where to spend the night. They were walking through Berkeley Square when they noticed a "To Let" sign outside a dilapidated house. Had they but known, this was the infamous number 50. For 40 years it had been empty. No one dared live in it. To Blunden and Martin, it seemed the answer to their problem. It would at least be a place to shelter and keep warm till morning. They got in by a basement window. One of them had a stump of candle in his pocket. This they lit, and by its light explored the downstairs rooms. All round were signs of neglect. Bits of furniture were scattered about, dust was everywhere, rats scuttled across the floors. They decided to climb up to the first floor and see what the rooms were like there, but again all was ruin and disorder. So, by the dwindling light of the almost exhausted candle, the two men climbed to the second floor. Blunden was feeling nervous by this time and wanted to leave the house. Martin would not hear of it. Why should they pay for a lodging, he said, when this place was cheap and good enough for a few hours? At this moment they entered the haunted room. It was less disordered than the others, and Martin decided a fire could be made in the hearth. Between them the sailors managed to collect some bits of wood, and soon there was a warming blaze that cheered them up. They settled down for the night. Martin went to sleep at once. Blunden felt uneasy, and wakefully watched the fire as it flickered in the grate, and it was he who first heard the noise. He woke Martin with a vigorous shake. "Listen," he whispered. At first Martin could hear nothing, but then came the sound of a footstep on the stairs. After a pause, the same sound again, but nearer this time. Then another step, nearer yet. And what made these footfalls more frightening than anything Martin had ever heard before was that they were not human. Not even anything earthly. They made a soft, hollow sound, but also they scratched on the bare wooden boards of the steps. Scratched as though the feet were padded and clawed, like an animal's. On the steps came with agonizing slowness, on and upwards. On until they reached the door of the room where Martin and Blunden sat sweating from fear, and there they stopped. Slowly, the room door opened. Something came in, but Martin was hard put to know what that something was. A collection of shadows, perhaps, a shapeless form, A being, no doubt of that. Blunden screamed. Both men scrambled to their feet and faced the spectre, which seemed to be growing in size as they watched. Frantic with fear, Blunden looked round desperately for something to defend himself with. An old curtain rod was propped against the wall near a window. He rushed to it and grabbed it up. As he did so, the spectre moved so that it was placed between Blunden and the door. Then, from out of its shapeless, featureless shadows, emerged two limbs. Not hands or arms quite. They reminded Martin of a huge bird's talons. For a moment the thing remained motionless, towering over Blunden, its limbs outstretched. But then it began to move slowly, deliberately towards him. He let out another anguished scream as he saw the thing coming towards him, but the spectre did not pause. It was now that Martin saw his chance. As the ghost moved towards Blunden, the open door was left unguarded. Martin dived for it, tumbled out of the room, and crashed down the stairs. He could never remember undoing the bolts that secured the front door, but somehow he did, for that was the way he left the house. Panic-stricken, yelling for help, he ran from the square. In Piccadilly, he found a policeman. Almost demented, Martin stammered out some of his story as he brought the policeman back to Berkeley Square. As they were running towards the house, both men heard the sound of breaking glass and splintering wood, and a long, falling scream. Then silence. They found Blunden's body crumpled over the basement steps. His neck was broken, and his eyes stared from his face in stark, paralysed horror. No one has ever explained the ghost of 50 Berkeley Square. It is a nameless horror, which for a time in the last century was the wonder and talk of London. It has gone now. The building stands in the busy square, disturbed only by the traffic that roars past its door.